Kia ora everybody, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Welcome to our Navigating Separation and Divorce panel. My name is Nadine and I'm going to be moderating the panel tonight, and I'm going to introduce you to our fantastic panelists in a moment. But I've just got a few things to tell you about before we get underway. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that, wherever you're at in the process, separation is emotionally charged and it's stressful and it's overwhelming. So wherever you're at, kia kaha, just know that other people find it the same way. And we just really hope that tonight can give you some useful information and also, I guess, a bit of a community that is helpful to your experience. So we want it to be a safe space where you can ask anything, and normally we'd put names to questions, but we're going to keep all questions anonymous for obvious reasons. So you've already supplied some fantastic questions. We've grouped them so that we can try and, the ones that there've been 12 people asking, we can make sure we cover those really important ones. But inevitably, there will be other things that come up that you desperately want to ask or that occur to you during the course of the webinar. So if you want to ask one, just go down to the bottom of the screen into the Q&A box, and that'll come through to me, so it stays anonymous that way, and I'll do my best to add your question into the mix. The other thing I do need to tell you though is that this webinar, while I hope is going to be really useful, it's informational only. Without knowing the intricacies of your situation, just can't offer financial or legal advice. We are more than happy to do that in a one-on-one basis, but it just can't be in a group setting. But hopefully the information we provide you is still going to be really useful. Right, let me introduce you to our phenomenal panelists tonight. Bridget Jackson is the founder and chief executive of Equal X's, which you may have heard of. She's often mentioned in the news. She's a qualified lawyer, a trained divorce mediator, a settlement strategist, and a certified divorce coach. She's also a mum of 4. And it was her experience of going through a complex and long and conflict-filled divorce that led her to found Equal X's. So she very much knows the lay of the land. Kia ora, Bridget.
You're right. Thank you very much for having me on your webinar tonight. Really excited to be part of it.
Well, we're very excited to have you here. Also joining us tonight is Shelley Pellman. She is a financial advisor and a strategic coach at Enable Me. She's super efficient, she's straight talking, she calls it how she sees it, she's a firebrand and we love her for it. She is a mother of 2 and she too has navigated her way through divorce. So she has got lots of information to share that is deeply rooted in her personal experience. Kia ora, Shelley.
Hello, thanks for having me here tonight.
And as I said, my name is Nadine Higgins. I'm a financial advisor and a coach at Enable Me as well. And while I am happily married, I've experienced divorce from the child's perspective. So I guess we're all bringing something a little different to the table. And I just wanted to say before we move on that while we are all women, as you can see, we work with people on all sides of the separation or the divorce equation. So I hope that this panel can be useful to you and relatable for you, no matter which party you are. So I thought we might get into it maybe with a bit of a personal story sharing. Maybe we could start with you, Bridget. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience? I gave that brief snapshot that didn't make it sound very much fun, but of your experience of going through divorce.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nadine. So I have walked in your shoes, everybody, if you are thinking about separating or you have separated. So I went through a very high conflict divorce that took 5 years to settle and cost $500,000 with 4 children in the mix. And I thought, well, there's got to be a better and more positive way to do this, because the emotional toll that it took on me and my family and the wider family and even, the community was absolutely huge. And the time it took and the cost as well. There are better options, there are better alternatives to that. And until you go through it, I don't think you really know what you're going through, whether it's amicable or high conflict. It really is likened to a tornado or a tsunami, and it's definitely a roller coaster ride. And what I want to say to everybody is, it's okay to feel the way that you feel, because it's very, very normal. And it really is like someone's died, you know, it's like a bereavement. It's exactly the same. There's a grief process, and it can be really difficult. But, you know, one of the biggest things that you can do, and we certainly can help you with that at Equalex, is learning how to manage your emotions through the process. Yeah.
Well, Shelley has been through the tsunami, the bereavement as well. Can you give us a little bit of an idea about your story?
Yeah, so for me, I guess my little personal story is that 4 years ago, I went through a separation. Unlike Bridget, my story wasn't so exciting. We were fairly amicable, but still, it is a tsunami, and it's an incredibly stressful time for all involved. And I think, you know, we were together for 21 years. We had 2 children. You know, we'd been married for 10. I had taken time out of the workforce. So it's navigating the nuances of being that party who wasn't the main breadwinner and who couldn't build up or didn't want to or build up their career over that time, and the disadvantages that kind of happen. But I think for me, the biggest, I guess the biggest thing that allowed me to go through the process quite in a sort of a reasonably stress-free manner, perhaps compared to Bridget's experience, was feeling really empowered about having that path forward. And so I guess using my skills, and thank God I was with Enable Me, working at Enable Me before I went through the divorce, I could actually, I guess, put together and use my skill as a financial advisor to put myself together a plan. And so I had that path forward. I had 6 scenarios, all of which I was happy with. Based on various outcomes of the sale of the property and the settlement. And I think it helped me to sort of navigate it in a fairly calm manner at what otherwise is definitely not a calm time. So now, being in the position that I'm in, I'm helping and using my experience to help my clients navigate those waters as well. So very privileged to be able to use that experience of mine to help others as part of my job.
And my experience was completely different, as Shelley's mentioned, because I was actually completely unprepared. You know, I was one of those people, of which I see a lot of women in my practice, and some men as well, who had no idea about the finances. You know, I didn't manage the finances. I paid a few household bills. But I had a supplementary credit card, and so I had no idea. So I made the mistakes and pitfalls that many people make through the process, and now actually feel financially empowered and feel like I've got financial freedom. And I tell you, I used to hyperventilate thinking about, oh my God, I have to manage my finances and do a budget. And, you know, it was really overwhelming. But, you know, getting experts on board, like these fantastic coaches that you've got in front of you, you will never, ever regret it. You know, you really will never regret getting those experts involved, because if your car breaks down, you get a mechanic, don't you? So it's just the same when you go through divorce and separation. You need the likes of someone, a divorce coach, and that's what we do, is we hold people's hand. We are your thinking partner as you go through the process, helping you make the best decisions that you can make across the legal, the parenting, the financial, and the well-being, and avoiding those mistakes and those pitfalls, and Enable Me do that, obviously, from a financial perspective.
Just having someone on your team.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess so much of the settlement process is about starting again, and we are going to go through a whole lot of questions that have come through about people, you know, in your situation, Bridget, who maybe haven't been across the finances, and then finding, you know, the position they're in is not one of empowerment. So let's get into some of the questions. I thought I might start just with quite a broad one that's been sent through. I'm just beginning this process and I'm quite intimidated. Where do I start? So I know that is broad, but if you could just offer us one tip, what are the first 1 or 2 things you should be doing, Shelley?
I think start by seeing a lawyer. Know your rights, know what the laws are, and what you what your rights are in law, and just I think what the practical process is. Hey, what are the agreements that I need to work my way through? Relationship, property agreements, child spousal maintenance agreements, child support, custody. Understand the law. That's really your first port of call, would be my initial piece of advice. And following that, there are other things to do, but Bridget, I'll let you offer your initial advice too.
So we see people all the way through the process, but for us, the best time to come and see us is when you're thinking about separating, because it is really overwhelming. You don't know where to start. You don't know what expert to see or what not to see, and what so many things keeping you awake at night. So for us, it's coming to see us in the first instance, and we can talk about the process and what are the options there for you. We can help you write scripts. So if you haven't told your spouse that you want to separate, we want to ensure that you do it in a way that's amicable. Because if you start off being amicable at the start of the process, that means during the whole process, we can help you manage your emotions and communicate with them positively. That's going to end up obviously being beneficial for both of you and the family. So you've also got to put together your shared marital assets and what that looks like, because you want to go to the lawyer prepared as well. So one of the things we do in the first instance is obviously refer you to lawyers. So we have questions. We have a document entitled You and Your Lawyer. So questions for the lawyer, questions for yourself, and questions for the lawyer before you go and see them, because you want someone who is going to, if you're amicable, then you certainly want to have a lawyer who's going to not fuel the conflict, for example, who are actually, if you want to end up going to mediation, that is certainly something that they would be happy to do. So there's many things that we can help you with, managing your emotions, helping you communicate with your ex, whether that's the scripts in terms of how to communicate with them, or even how to tell the children that you want to separate, or the wider family, conflict coaching, all those sort of things that are necessary. And we also like to do a roadmap and a strategy when you first come to us. So what are the outcomes that you want during this process, and how are we going to get there, and what do you need to get there? So we want to ensure that you're not overwhelmed and feeling really intimidated by it all, because we have walked in your shoes. More than 50% of the population separate, and it can be done, as we call it, separating with dignity.
I like that. Yeah. But I think get the knowledge right. And so just understand the process.
Yeah.
And I think in my personal experience, we got the settlement and we sort of ripped the Band-Aid off. We got that settlement done fairly quickly, because I think it's harder to move on and rebuild if you're still navigating, well, I need to sell the home, and, I've got to work through that process, and I don't know. And what is, it is overwhelming. There is a lot to get through, but in my experience, get it done quicker, and you can move on and rebuild.
Absolutely, because you can fall into getting stuck in your story, where you actually end up having to move to the business of divorce. So you actually have to treat it like a business transaction, which can be very difficult, because you've got all these emotions going on in the background here. So yes, absolutely.
Speaking of business, let's get into some of the nitty-gritty of the questions. Bridget, how can I prevent my spouse from removing money from the relationship before we formally separate? This must be a big fear for a lot of people.
It is a big fear for a lot of people. So, what you need to do is obviously get legal advice in relation to that. But there are options, potentially that I think that all people need to do, and that is set up a separate bank account and start creating a nest egg for yourself is really important. There's options there to freeze accounts if you need to do that, but all of that, it comes back to being prepared. So you need to go and have a conversation with the likes of us. You need to get educated before you start making drastic moves. Okay.
Yeah, I think there are some options also to potentially talk to the bank, but of course that's not necessarily feeling particularly approachable when you're just in those early stages and you haven't really told anybody.
Yeah,
Shelley, quite a few people have wanted to know, what happens to my my KiwiSaver, my super savings, if I separate? Does my partner get 50% of that too?
Short answer, yes. Although Bridget and I were discussing this prior to the session, and of course, it's not just the law is 50-50, and so that's what it is. But if there is economic disparity, then there's room to negotiate potentially that one of the parties receives slightly more out of the settlement than the other to make up for that. But yes, with KiwiSaver, it is relationship property. So technically speaking, it's a 50-50 split. In practice, how this works is you don't physically remove the money from the KiwiSaver. It gets evened up out of the sale of the other assets, or that, if there aren't any other assets, that person may have to take on some debt to give you half of their KiwiSaver. Where I see that become a little bit of a problem for the person who hasn't been the main breadwinner is because that KiwiSaver or that superannuation scheme, it's essentially stays in place. And so the person who's been the main child carer ends up with getting half of that, but they end up then putting into the home, which means that they then have barely any KiwiSaver, for the longer term. So it's something to kind of overcome, I think, if you haven't been the main breadwinner and you don't have much in your superannuation, something that we need to just understand as part of the picture, that you're actually going to need to build that back up. So it can feel a little unfair in those circumstances.
Yeah, and the KiwiSaver, how it relates in terms of divorce is that it doesn't get taken from when you started working, but actually you are eligible, obviously, from when your relationship started in terms of the KiwiSaver. So not maybe 10 years before when your partner started working. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess that would be true of credit card debt too. So not just the savings, the debt. Yep. Someone else wanting to know about the credit card debt. Yep, that would be shared even if your partner ran up the debts.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably student loans too, if those are still in play.
And that's why, I think when you are in the process of separating, that you potentially cancel the credit cards or just have your own personal credit card, I think would be a really good tip for people to avoid someone shopping up a storm.
I did actually have an example of a client. The partner actually, he passed away, but he left behind a lot of credit card debt. And she was actually able to negotiate with the credit card companies to actually forgive a lot of that. A couple of them were in his name, not hers. So she was able to kind of negotiate that with those credit card companies. So it's not 100% given that you do have to take on that debt. There's probably room to kind of approach the credit card company and say, hey, I know I'm liable for half this debt, but can we talk because I can't afford this.
Bridget, there's a question here. My husband has control of the finances and earns a large salary. How long should he be paying me spousal support for? It might be hard to say exactly, but can you give us any kind of guide? Yeah,
sure. Usually spousal maintenance is paid to someone for 6 months to 2 years. That's generally. And so it's really important for people who have been at home as the main caregiver need to actually fill a spousal maintenance template out. So, and that's got to show everything that you have been doing whilst you were married. And if that includes facials or getting your hair done or going to the gym, all of those expenses need to be included. Absolutely. So I have seen 5 years before, but pretty much it's between 6 months and 2 years.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where you actually need to know what you do spend, right, Shelley?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can imagine I had my spreadsheets, Nadine.
But it's really common for people not to know exactly where the money goes. So I guess it's a point of reckoning.
I guess the idea behind with it, sorry, before we move on, is that it allows the main caregiver of the children or whatever or the person who hasn't been the main breadwinner to build back up their career. And certainly in my case, that was exactly what it was for. I had a 2-year spousal maintenance and it allowed me to sort of ease into going back to work and increasing my hours over those 2 years. And so that was actually really helpful and it worked, and for the purpose that it was put in place. So
some people get confused about spousal maintenance and economic disparity. So economic disparity is a payment that usually lump sum, but obviously will be negotiated in terms of your own scenario. But that's given to the main caregiver, the person who's been home with the children, because at the end of the day, you've sacrificed your career, male or female, obviously, to have your children. And that what happens in terms of that we talk about, usually cases are a 50-50 split in terms of relationship property, but if economic disparity is valid, then usually the split could be potentially 55-45 or 60-40 of your shared marital asset pool. Generally,
I want to start talking about starting over, because obviously you have to, but also there's a lot to navigate in that process. So we're going to talk about sort of pre and post nups and children and all of those things a little later, but let's start about kind of getting back on your feet, because there are lots of questions in this category. Shelley, when the finances have been split and you're left with a decent amount of money but not enough to buy property, what do you suggest I do?
I know. I call it the starting over. I call the licking of the wounds. You're just regrouping, really, aren't you? Licking your wounds and kind of thinking about, and okay, how am I going to move forward from this? But yeah, I think regardless of how much you come out with, regardless of whether or not you can actually buy a property, it's building a financial plan and actually having that path forward. So if potentially that involves renting for the rest of your life, and so when you say a decent amount of money, obviously we could would need to understand the quantum, but your financial plan will allow you to understand, well, okay, if I don't buy, I will actually have enough to last me till age 90 or whatever. If I rent at a certain capacity, and that's going to allow me to spend X amount per year. So very nuanced in terms of your situation, but yeah, it's just building that plan. Okay, where to here, whether that involves property or not. And that's the sort of thing that I work through with my clients, is that way forward.
Yeah, and just because it isn't enough to buy a property doesn't mean that you are destined to be destitute. It's just potentially looking at different ways to cut it.
Usually
lots of different living arrangements these days too.
Oh, there are, and like usually it is better to try and buy a property, just because of the volatility of renting and what have you. But there are lots of different living arrangements, such as multi-generational families. You get a lot of that where grandma's or granddad is under the same roof as the family. So yeah, you're right, Nadine, it doesn't necessarily mean destitution, but it is particularly empowering if you can understand that, well, with that money I do have, I'll be okay. And that's just getting a really good financial plan in place.
Bridget, we've got a question here from someone who is the main breadwinner. How do you find a fair way to separate that doesn't actually take you back to starting over financially?
Well, that's making sure that you don't give away the farm, really. You really have to make sure that your experts that you employ are able to, obviously on your behalf, able to negotiate a good deal for you. And that's where obviously the spousal maintenance comes in for your ex-partner, and that's why it only goes over a certain period of time. So then there needs to be a discussion about, and if you can be amicable, I mean, if you can sit around the table and actually work through it pro se together, that is the best way to do it, rather than obviously getting lawyers involved, heavily involved. And I think that you've got to actually have no regrets in terms of the way that you've both acted through the process. And that's actually realizing that when you sign that settlement agreement, you're both going to be slightly unhappy. So you are going to have to compromise in terms of that. All right. So, and if you've got children in the mix, you don't want to be taking the other party for everything you can possibly get, because that's going to have ramifications in the future. How are you going to perceive yourself? Are you going to regret the way that you've acted because you've tried to do that? And, at the end of the day, you want to be able to continue to be friends with them, particularly if you have a really effective co-parenting relationship with them. So I think putting yourself in the other person's shoes as well, what would it be like if you were left with hardly anything? It's about being fair. It's about divorcing well. It is. It's possible to do that. And I highly recommend that people really do put themselves in other people's shoes, the other partner's shoes. So what would it be like if I did X, Y, Z to him or her, and tried to actually take 70% or 80% of the shared marital asset pool? Because at the end of the day, it's commonly known that money doesn't make you happy. It really doesn't.
Yeah. To add to that, I guess from a financial perspective, the main breadwinner generally can start over a little bit easier because they have the income to, say, support extra lending. So in my experience, whoever has been the main breadwinner can get that mortgage, they can pay that mortgage off faster. They can actually get ahead a little bit quicker, as opposed to the party who has not, and may never earn those same levels of income. That makes it a lot harder. So, just the breadwinner generally has a slight financial advantage for that reason. Access to lending, higher income, they can actually get on top of things a lot quicker.
It's a bit of a curly question here, and I don't have a lot of details, so it might be difficult to answer, but you might have some wisdom to share here. Financial abuse. How do you manage the complexity of that in a divorce process?
I think Bridget was talking about that today, weren't you?
No, and we it's very difficult, and I think that it's can happen. It can come on without you knowing it, really. Because if you're the main caregiver at home and you've been managing the children, and your other partner, manages the finances, it can start off really small. Like, for example, they'll say, "Oh, well, I'll manage all the household finances," and then it might lead to things like, well, you've got a budget that you've got to be on, and so it can escalate, and it is very difficult. You've got to think about, how does that make you feel? Are you being stopped from doing things that you really enjoy? What other sort of behaviors does that come with that? And there might be things like gaslighting in relation to your finances, that sort of thing that's happening. There might also, and it generally go together, there might be emotional abuse, there might even be physical abuse and financial abuse. And you may start thinking, well, is this person a high conflict personality? We don't want to diagnose anyone with specific disorders, but certainly when there's financial abuse, that is a sign of a high conflict personality. It absolutely is. If you are finding yourself in that situation, then you need to get help. You absolutely need to get help. You need to prepare for divorce before you leave. Is really important, because
exit strategy.
The detrimental effect of that is, if you haven't got control of your finances, if you haven't got an equal partnership, that could be very, very difficult for you down the track when you separate. If you don't know what you own and owe, that is very difficult. The last thing you want to do is have to go to court and get full and frank disclosure of everything that you own and owe. So what you need to do is, you need to go on a bit of a fishing expedition. You need to start gathering information. The home computer, any evidence, for example, of your KiwiSaver. You need tax returns of what your partner earns, he or she earns. All of that information you need, because financial abuse can actually get worse and worse over the years as the years go on. And that is making you feel worthless and hopeless. And for you, you're feeling very disempowered in terms of that.
So what can we do? What's the exit strategy? How can you get best prepared to eventually, like any form of abuse, it's not to be tolerated? And I think, let's work on finding out the information, maybe building up your income so that you're gradually working to the point where you're feeling strong enough to leave. Get some expert advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that when I separated, that was in my favor, my mother died of ovarian cancer, unfortunately, and I ended up going on the board of the New Zealand Gynae Cancer Foundation. I later became GM, but you've got to keep your hand in a job, even if you're doing something from a charity perspective, or you're on the school PTA. You have always got to keep your hand in doing some sort of work, even though you're the main caregiver. That's really important, because that's going to be the stepping stone for you once you go through the divorce and separation process to actually, and spousal maintenance, as Shelley talked about, is there for you. So if you need to go and retrain in a career or upskill yourself in some way, do something that you're passionate about, because that certainly is going to help you find your purpose and find your identity again after being in a relationship that's not serving you well.
My apologies for my dog just chipping into our webinar, the joys of trying to broadcast from home. He just wanted to be heard. Let's talk a little bit about property, the family home in particular. Shelley, someone here says, my spouse wants to buy out my share of the family home. Is it as simple as just paying me half of the equity?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. But there's probably wider relationship assets that need to be discussed. So generally not just the family home. In my experience, financially speaking, it's actually very difficult to buy the other person out, because not only are you taking on that same level of debt that you've got, you then have to pay half the equity, which can be quite significant if there's been some capital gain, particularly if you're Auckland based. And all of a sudden you're on your own. So getting a loan from the bank to pay that person out, in my experience with my clients, is nigh on impossible. So what ends up happening is the family home gets sold, and everything gets distributed and you move on. But so in short, yes, it is that simple. But there'll be other nuances around, well, have you got a higher super, and is that, do things need to be evened up with the buying out of the 50-50? Is there disparity? Is it 60-40, 55-45, etc.? But yes, in theory, yes, it is just that simple.
What happens if the home is in a family trust? There's quite a lot of people going, how do you navigate a divorce when assets like the home are in a trust?
Well, yeah, and that can be very difficult. So really you need to get some legal advice in relation to that. All right. That's really important in terms of your own scenario, getting some legal advice.
Yeah, presumably it's you're both beneficiaries, etc., and the children would be beneficiaries. Generally the home will be sold and the trust will be wound up. Yeah. I think in practice, that trust is no longer there for the benefit of you two as the beneficiaries, and so it would be wound up. So that's not an overly simple process either, and one for the lawyers.
Yeah, and you can obviously, when you're a single person, you can even set up your own trust, but definitely go to an expert who's an expert in trust who can give you that advice.
Yeah, I think either way, it's not there for the same reason, so it would end up being wound up and the assets distributed accordingly.
What about moving on to another property? How do you manage buying a new property after you've separated but before you've actually divorced? Shelley, have you got anything you could suggest there?
I actually am not sure if I'm legally divorced yet. We've done the paperwork. I'm not sure if it's gone through. So separation and divorce are two different things. So divorce is the actual act of the dissolution of your marriage through the courts or births, deaths and marriages, whatever it is.
$150, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And separation is just the merging apart of your lives, and so I guess they're two different things really, but you can manage buying a new house even if you're not divorced. You do it in your own name. You get the lending in your own name, you have your equity from the marriage settlement, and that's just part of that, building that plan forward with, say, buying a home or understanding whether or not you have a slightly different living arrangement and how you're going to manage going forward.
More difficult though if it's pre-settlement, I would imagine.
Oh, that's what I was about to say.
Pre-settlement.
Do not, before you have settled your relationship property, go and buy another house, which many people do, and quite a few women do, obviously, because they're very emotional about wanting a house for the children. That could end up, particularly if you're in a high conflict scenario,
becoming relationship property.
Yeah, it's not good to do that. They might be held against you. But do not do that.
That's a great little thing to add into the mix. Okay, maybe we should move on to the kids. Bridget, can you give us any guidance as to the responsibility of each partner when one of them has custody of the children?
Okay, so I'm assuming that means that, potentially this says one has custody of the children. I assume the other party gets custody of them too. So they both have, or is that just saying one has custody of the children?
Yeah, one has custody of the children. So we're reading into this question a little bit, but I'm guessing it's about child support, potentially about access to the children, any responsibilities to take care of them if you don't have custody?
Yeah. Well, there may be, if you don't have custody, there might be a parenting order in place that obviously gives one party has full custody, and depending on your scenario, what that could look sort of there might be supervised access for the other party. Now, in terms of child support, that can either be done privately or that can be done through the IRD. On the IRD website, there is a calculator, and as long as you know what your ex-partner earns, you can actually...
Sometimes tricky.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why you have to collect the...
fishing expedition. Yeah.
It'll give you an approximate assessment of what that child support will be. And if you've got them full time, that will be that potentially could be quite a large chunk. There is a limit. It's around about $140,000 a year on child support, salary wise. So so that's in terms of that. But in terms of custody responsibilities, if both parties have the children, it's really a very good idea, and we do this in our business, is have a parenting agreement. Obviously, when your children get to about 15, 16, they pretty much can choose where they live. If it went to court, the judge would be acting in the best interest of what the children want in terms of where they want to live. And there's a lot of things that you need to consider in that. And that's obviously when you have the children, your ex-partner can't be dictating to you what you do with them during that time. Obviously, if there's safety issues, then that's going to be a concern. For example, that a parenting agreement, a parenting plan includes, holidays, who's going to pay for the communication, who's going to pay for the joint expenses, what does that look like for sports, all that sort of thing. Holidays internationally, there needs to be an itinerary, there needs to be time during that holiday. When are they able to talk to each other? There needs to be notice of when you're going to have a child for the holidays and what that looks like. What I recommend for clients is that you actually each have one of those yearly war planners, and you actually map out a year in advance. I mean, you have to have some flexibility, obviously. Who's going to be having Mother's Day? Are the kids going to be with you? Father's Day? What about the children's birthdays? Any other public holidays? Because when you haven't got the children, if you do have custody of them, you need to make sure that you have a holiday and you're able to book a holiday or have some time off when you haven't got the children with you. So definitely a parenting plan is really useful. Parenting apps are really useful because that means it's one platform for you. You can communicate on one platform rather than by text, WhatsApp, email. That's excuse me, that was the dog. That's really useful. Our Family Wizard and Two Houses are really good. There's free ones and there's ones that you can pay for. And the beauty of these is that Family Wizard, for example, is it tempers your language if it's starting to get out of hand, which is really, really useful. The other thing that's really I recommend people to do is we do a lot of coaching around how to effectively co-parent, because your relationship has changed. It's not an intimate relationship anymore. It really is doing that. Obviously, it's changed. So your parameters have changed. You can't just turn up at someone's house, your ex-partner's house, without telling them, for example, that you're coming around, because that's obviously going to potentially escalate the conflict. So your relationship has changed. Both of you are going to have to actually contact the school and say, look, can you please email us both now at different email addresses, school reports, when school functions are. So getting some coaching on how you can effectively do that is going to be really beneficial, particularly for the children, less trauma on the children moving forward. If they can see that their parents are able to manage their emotions.
Each other. Yeah. Use an abundance of courtesy would be my advice there.
Yeah.
You know,
those are some good tips. I like the sound of the apps, although when you talked about wizard, I thought you were referring to the name of the dog.
Oh no, sorry.
Family wizard.
No, his name's Bentley.
Yeah, I can tell you that school holidays are like Tetris when you have shared custody. So, you know, having 100% custody is hard too, but having shared custody, it's like Tetris, particularly when you're in a blended family situation and there's someone else's children involved and their ex-partner. And yeah, we end up printing off, the wall plan is a good idea, Bridget. We ended up printing off a calendar and sort of doing this awkward highlighter thing.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. And I think one thing that's is one of my, if I can give you a tip, all of you a tip, and this is really, really important because it can really affect your children, is do not disparage your ex to your children. You know, that is one of my, if you can't do anything else, don't do that.
I do that. Agreed.
And I was guilty of doing that in my early years because the frustration and the angriness that I had, you know, for him and the way that he was behaving, because you forget that you can't control anyone else's actions and behaviors and just your own. So, you know, that advice, if you remember nothing else, will hold you in good stead, because at the end of the day, time is a healer. And it would be really wonderful if all of us, as time goes past, you can actually have a better relationship with your ex than you did when you first separated, for example. You know, but there are some benefits of divorce, and that's actually being better parents, you know.
And the kids' tendency is to want to make you feel better, and so if you do vent to them, then it can kind of put an unfair adult burden on their shoulders. I mean, it depends on the age of the child, right? All right, let's talk about expenses. Shelley, how do they work when one partner moves out of the family home while the other stays with the children until they move? And I think there was a similar one to that was basically, if I'm in the family home, do they have to contribute to the mortgage? Any guidance there?
Yeah, I think it's one of those practical things, and it's wonderful if I've been working with a couple and they happen to separate during the course of working with me in one of our programs, we know their numbers, and so we end up doing this kind of, we go through the budget and we decide, well, this is your personal expense, this is your personal expense, this is joint, you know, and we come up with a number. And my advice would be you've generally got a joint account if you've been married or together and own a home together. And so keep that account as your joint bills account. And discuss and agree a contribution to go into that account. So I always recommend when you're thinking of separating or you are separating, you absolutely should open your own personal bank account, start getting paid into that bank account. And then it's a conversation with your ex, hopefully on an amicable basis. How much are we putting into this joint account? So I think in terms of the question, when one partner moves out or the other stays in, it's I don't know the nuances of that particular situation, but I think it's just agreeing on a fair contribution. So if you're fairly 50-50, chuck in 50-50 of the costs of running that household. We've had a situation with clients before where one of the parties moved out and rented for a while. They just couldn't bear to be in the same house. One of the parties stayed in the house and looked after the children, and they did that for 6 to 12 months. And they actually shared the cost of the rent as well. So they kind of both contributed to the housing costs for each of them. And then they were eventually able to do their settlement agreement and move on individually. But having that joint bills account. And I think that dovetails into maybe one of those other questions around tips and suggestions for managing joint accounts with children. So my partner does this beautifully with his ex-wife, where basically they've just agreed, they've done a spreadsheet, may have had a little bit of a hand in that spreadsheet.
I happen to know a spreadsheet wizard.
But it was just agreeing, hey, here are the costs relating to the children that are genuinely sort of 50-50. They have a 50-50 arrangement. So school fees, kids' activities, that sort of thing. But also, you know, birthday parties. And so haircuts and, you know, new school shoes, those kinds of things. So they haven't quite gone so far as to do the joint holiday thing. But they equally contribute to that. And they only, you know, they're quite transparent about what gets taken out of that. So that works really well, just to have that. But yeah, it comes down to just agreeing the amount, right? And making the contribution fair depending on the split of income or child care, or if it's 50-50, just half each.
One thing that was obviously mentioned in that last question So obviously if someone's in the house, the mortgage is being paid, but also the rent also needs to be taken into account when there's a post wash up, as in the settlement happens. All of that needs to be taken into account as well.
So as in one party has paid.
It's paid whilst potentially maybe paying the mortgage as well. So that all needs to be taken into account, which
is part of that wash up. Okay.
Yeah.
An extension of the child expenses question, what is the expectation around what child support is meant to be used for? The example here they give is a child's orthotics, or is it everything, or is it just basic costs, or other things over and above to be negotiated?
Well, everyone's scenario is different. And, there are, as I mentioned, there are private arrangements. I think you've actually got to think about all of the expenses that you have in terms of your children and negotiate in terms of what that looks like, because I know that child support can be light.
Usually is.
Children are very expensive. I don't want to calculate how much 4 children is going to cost me by the time I die, to be honest.
Millions.
And I think that if you can have a sit down and have a conversation with your ex, or get an intermediary who's able to help you both communicate in terms of this issue. And
you're the person who has majority childcare as well. Obviously, you're housing the children. Say you have them, 12 nights out of the 14. Well, there's the power, the water,
absolutely.
Food, the bigger house, so you can house them appropriately. All of that.
Yeah, all that needs to be taken into account. And I think that at the end of the day, you want happy, healthy children. You really do. That's really, really fundamental. And if you can look past how you feel about each other at that moment in time, if you are, really struggling with your emotions, because it is a grief process that you're going through, just focus on your beautiful children that you have together, and ensuring that they're able to have the stability that they need. And I mean, obviously, this all comes back to how much you both, what it looks like for you financially in terms of your shared marital asset pool. And it can be difficult. Going into 2 households, it's going to be a stretch. It is expensive. It's much more expensive, as we know, in terms of cost of living, mortgage interest rates going up. Everything's gone up, and it is really difficult. And that's why it's really, really important to get that expert advice. So that sets out a plan for you across all those areas that you need it.
You might not have thought about.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you've got that plan, then I guess that's one less thing to fret about, because you at least know what's in the budget and what can be covered, and what's in the kitty for unexpected expenses and the like.
And children do grow up.
Yes, they do.
So it's temporary.
Yeah,
and I mean, making sure you've got a really good, like Enable Me coaches who can actually talk to you about the likes of, are we entitled to working for families? All of those sort of things, because all those sort of benefits that you can get through the government
will help.
Investigate.
Absolutely.
Know what you're entitled to. I know we're running out of time, so I'd like to move on and talk about prenups and postnups and contracting out of the Relationship Properties Act. And
there's a whole webinar on this, I think, Nadine.
I think so too. So we'll scratch the surface, I think. This person wants to know, are prenup agreements really worth it? Bridget?
Yeah, well, I say yes. However, it really depends on who's drafted and how robust it is. So you definitely need to get some legal advice around that and what that looks like. Because there's been plenty of occasions where people are wanting to see if they can obviously get out of the prenup that they signed. They may argue that they've signed it under duress, etc. So my strong advice is to get some legal advice before you go into signing a prenup.
There is also, I guess, a couple of questions almost wanting to know whether they can have a postnup. Is there a way to protect your assets that you had before you were married? I think this makes it sound like they are already married, but they're now like to protect them.
Separate property. That's what you mean? Prior to getting married. Yeah, absolutely. You can, in terms of that, you can there might be, you might have a house or whatever it looks like, other assets, but once again, you need to go and get advice in relation to that.
I think what they're asking though is if you are already married and you haven't had that discussion before you got there, can you do it in retrospect?
Oh, yeah, right. I believe you can contract out at any time. That's my understanding. Is that right, Bridget?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's never too late to do it. You just have to both agree to it.
Yes, correct. You can contract out at any time, but you both have to agree to it, and you both have to seek independent legal advice.
Absolutely. You need you can't, and that's, some people make the mistake thinking that you just need one lawyer, but you actually need independent advice. So you have your own lawyer, and then one of the lawyers will decide, you'll decide who out of those two lawyers will draw up the settlement agreement, and that the cost of that can obviously come off your post-separation wash up, and they need to certify that. So this comes back to having full and frank disclosure about everything you owe and owe, because if it's found out that someone's been hiding something, then that can potentially be overturned.
Let's squeak in 2 more questions. Bridget, what is a de facto partner entitled to, and when does a relationship start for the purposes of a de facto partnership?
So a de facto relationship, the Relationship Properties Act kicks in after 3 years, earlier if you have a child together. So really when you start living together. And so you have to make sure if there's any agreements that, if you do want to contract out of the Property Relationship Act, or there's a property sharing agreement or any of those sort of things. So make sure you get onto that. That's really important. So obviously when you're married, it's 2 years, and de facto it's 3 years. And more people these days are in de facto relationships rather than decide to legally get married. Yeah.
Marriage is declining.
Yeah. And more than 50% of the population are leaving each other, whether that's separated or divorced.
It's grim statistics, and I've no doubt that it's spiked post-COVID. That's what your experience would be, wouldn't it, Bridget?
Yes, my business has gone up at least 30% during that period. But however, I'm really encouraged because we're getting a lot of amicable couples coming to us who want to work together, and that means for us is minimising the input of lawyers. You obviously need lawyers involved, but what we do is we come from shared and common interests, and that's and we want to make sure, as we talk about, for us, it's not going to court. Court is an option working with us. It's going to take you 2 to 2.5 years to get to court, let alone how much money you're going to have to pour down the toilet for that, and the emotional toll that it's going to take on you as well. It's not worth it. It really isn't.
No, you can't move on.
Let's then look forward. How do you navigate combining your finances with a new partner, especially, I guess, when you have kids on both sides? And I know, Shelley, you have intimate knowledge of this, as well as navigating it with your clients. What tips could you offer us?
Yeah, for sure, sitting down and having that conversation. So my poor partner, pretty much our first date, I asked him whether he had a credit card. He didn't. So I was tick, you're in. But I think agree a financial vision. So have the conversations early with your partner, sit down, what do you like with money? What do you want to do? Where do you want to land? Get on the same page with your partner. Ideally, and this is certainly the intention, is to try and build enough wealth together that it doesn't matter what happens, right? So let's actually get you with a beautiful joint plan. And I love doing this with my clients who come together. I've perhaps worked with them as a singleton, and then they've brought someone else in, and I get really excited because you get that extra income coming in, and we're right, what can we do together? What magic can we make? Because let's grow your wealth enough that it doesn't actually matter anymore. But I think if you're not on the same page financially, and there may be disparity in terms of earnings or assets, then don't combine. You can have your relationship property agreement to protect what you do bring into the relationship, but you can continue to have separate bank accounts. So you could perhaps have a joint bills account, again, with your new partner, where you equally contribute to the household running costs, and then you save separately. And so you can actually use those separate savings to, say, pay down the mortgage or put that money towards an investment property or any other kind of wealth creation mechanism. But keeping it separate like that in your separate account, you can sort of do a once a year one pager. This is separate property, but I'm putting it in, I'm intermingling it. I forget what the term is, Bridget will know, deed of acknowledgement of debt or something like that. But you can still create wealth and still have that plan and still get ahead, pay the mortgage off faster, but still keep that if you are a higher income earner, keep that as separate property, which I think a lot of people don't realize. So you can join to a point. But yeah, it's nice if you can kind of just go in boots and all and let's just grow your wealth and let's have this beautiful joint vision. But if you're not, then I would recommend don't combine, keep it separate.
Yeah, and I think I want to add to that. So we have a document which is 50 plus questions. So when you're thinking about moving in with someone, what sort of money personality are you? Are you a saver?
We do the same thing.
Yeah.
Is there a student loan there that I don't know about? What's your parenting style? So money, absolutely, that's key, but also all the other areas of your life, all those portfolios. What is it going to look like? How are we going to be? Being the biological parent, I'm going to be the one who's going to be disciplining, and you can just support me in the background for the interim until the children get to know you. So how's it going to look from from a social perspective? So all of those areas need to be considered. Absolutely. Are you tidy? Are you clean? All of those things.
We don't want to be making the same mistakes, do we?
Exactly. And I guess if I could issue one encouragement / plea, even if you are leaving a relationship and you have been financially removed from the running of it, you can do things differently the next time. You need to stay involved and never abdicate that to somebody else, because that is your power, and you need to know.
Be the ostrich. Do not put your head in the sand when it comes to finances.
In this case, ignorance is not bliss, and I think
it's quite painful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think whether you're single or you're getting into a relationship or you're in a relationship, whatever, everyone needs to know what they own and owe, because at the end of the day, everything revolves around money. And it means in the future that you can be really proud of yourself, because saving, and then you go and buy, you can have a celebration about going and buying a new house or a new car, or that is really fulfilling, is thinking, well, I've got control of my life and
in charge of your own destiny. Exactly. And I guess we are running out of time, but just kind of as a final wrap up, I wanted to say that as we said at the beginning, it can be a lonely road and a stressful road and a bewildering road and not knowing where to start, which I think it's where it's really powerful to have someone walking alongside you. So that could be Bridget, it could be Shelley, it could be any one of the advisors at Enable Me. Yes, or both, someone to walk beside you, hold your hand, fight your corner, help you design what life looks like beyond all of this. So we have a couple of options for you if you do want to seek our advice. If we can be of assistance, we'd love to help you. So there's a discount on an initial consultation with Enable Me. All you need to do is either scan that QR code or go to the web address that's listed on your screen, and we'll sit you down and kind of do a diagnosis. Where are things at? What do we know? What do we need to find out? Where do we need to get to? And then we can get into that process, as Shelley described, as what do things look like afterwards? We tend to work with our clients for a year at least, and given that separation and settlement can take a really long time, the sooner you do that, to start imagining what life looks like beyond, the better.
And just to interject there, Nadine, I would recommend, if you are going through a separation process or about to embark on that you actually see us before rather than after settlement, because we need to be understanding, well, what I need to do the 6 scenarios for you around, what potentially will be the outcome of this settlement, and is that okay? Is that acceptable to you? Is there a path forward? Can you obtain the lending for the delta of between what you're receiving and what you want to go ahead and buy?
We have also had people come to see us prior to separating, because they kind of just want to suss out their options and they're doing their research, and that's okay too. Bridget, people could also access, I think, a 15-minute chat with your team.
Free chat. Happy to have a chat. I want to know what's keeping you awake at night. and how we can help you through that. What's your biggest concerns? And ideally, we would love to see you before you separate, because we want to help you prepare, whether that's you as an individual or whether that's you as a couple. Because we really want to help you divorce well. There is a way to divorce well. There really is.
So you can either scan the QR code or go to the website or book in directly, although that one is a little bit more complicated, that link, but scan the QR code or go to the website. That's probably the easiest
email me
way.
Yeah, email me or call me on my mobile. That's no problem. Yeah.
And to those of you who are wanting to take more control of your finances, we're actually running a whole raft of different topics on Money Chats, whether it's about pay rises, pay gaps, money in relationships, because sometimes that can avoid separation when that's the real sticking point. We have seen that. Some of our coaches end up being marriage counselors, or about ensuring that your kids are financially independent and also kind of money mindset. So if you would like to come along to any one of them, they are all free. You just need to go to the website and register, and we'll send you all the details. So thank you so much, Bridget. You're phenomenal. You're doing really important work. Shelley, you're incredible as always. And thank you to everyone for joining us. I know that it's a sensitive topic, so thanks for being brave enough to show up and have a conversation about it. We'll send you an email with the recording in case you want to rewatch anything, but otherwise, have a wonderful evening. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.